University, only in Leiden University. So we're just a little bit late, giving the time for everybody to come. Welcome. On my behalf, Christine Tremblay, my co-researcher, Sylvia Cheva, Faith in Human Rights, and the Center of Global Governance. Thank you so much for being here in person or online. Today we want to tackle a little bit this concept of universality and reachability of human rights and shake it a bit, because we have always the impression that human rights applies to everybody. And we will focus on a case on Canada, my home country, in which I grew up, and I was taught all my life and in law school to be very proud of being Canadian because we are one of those human rights champions. Well, if you look a bit more closer, this human rights dream do not apply to everybody in Canada, and especially to Aboriginals and Indigenous people. And by that, I mean First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. They have been left out of this Canadian dream. There has been discriminatory, racist, and genocidal policy against them since the first day European white settlers set foot on the Canadian soil. But today, we want to talk about something positive, about a successful story. The successful story of, and now it gets difficult for me, and I apologize, the Chilcotin Nation in the area of British Columbia, who have won not one, but two cases at the Supreme Court of Canada, which is the highest court. And one of them was about the recognition of their rightful land rights. And the other one was a case about a copper and golden mine on their land. So they stopped the development of the company who was developing the mine. And I guess it's, for me, it's an example of resilience of the nation using like those legal tools which are alien to their way of lives, but then keep going and have acknowledged something which was rightfully theirs. So I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Chief Joe Alphonse from the, I'm going to try it again. I'm so sorry. Chilcotin Nation, to tell you those successful and great stories from his people. Please.
Canada, hope you guys are well. Chief Joe Alphonse, I'm Chilcotin. English version, Chilcotin. We're in central British Columbia. I'm chief now for 14 years. 9 years before that, I was executive director for the Chilcotin National Government. 9 years before that, I started with the Tribal Council. I held just about every position you could hold within our Tribal Council. But part of what we do, all the battles we've had, and the fights to get our rights recognized, our title, everything, we've always brought our culture with us. To us, that's a big part of who we are. We're spiritual people, very spiritual. No matter what we do, we believe that you bring who you are. You're not going to try to pretend to be anybody else. I'm Chilcotin. When I come in, whether it's a courtroom, boardroom, or whatever else. That's what I'm bringing into the room. And it includes everything. And if you don't like it, tough luck. If you're a company, I'll tell you to leave, you can leave anytime. Coming to Europe is first trip to Europe. It's been quite an eye opener. We've had opportunities, so new opportunities, which has led to this opportunity to speak to you guys, young people that are working as international lawyers. That's great. But no matter where you're at, if you're working in countries such as Canada, my advice to you is learn about Indigenous peoples, the way they do things. So we want to share a little bit of who we are in a traditional way. Because everything we believe as Indigenous people, we had a drum song and a prayer for everything we did. And we always do things that's going to be good for us as individuals, but we want to also do things that's good for the environment. And we want, things that I have to say, I don't want that to stain anybody's thoughts or whatever. So we do traditionally before contact, a chief would always have a spiritual person with them, a medicine person. So in a modern world, we bring in a lot of those old ways of doing business back. And today I have my spiritual healer here, Cecil. I asked him to come up. He's going to conduct us a little ceremony. I asked professors here. I don't think you've had too many Red Indian ceremonies here. So we're going to do one. I say Indian because in Canada, most people say Indigenous or First Nations. But Canada, the legal term is in Indian. So I've fought in the courtroom all the time. So I've gotten into a habit of saying Indians. So coming to Europe and it's like Indians are from India. So you guys are Red Indians. So Red Indian, I guess, is what I am today. So I hope the term doesn't offend anybody. But anyway, I'll hand this portion over to Cecil and conduct this.
Part of our ceremony, water is very important, to keep it clean, so we can drink animals and whatsoever that that needed. And water is an important ceremony. This morning with the another place we went to this morning, we did a ceremony with a smudge, and I don't think we can do a smudge over here, so I'm going to do a water ceremony for myself, and Chief Joe. This water is very important, for us. When I put that right over here, I take that right through my body, right from head to toe. I feel it just like having a bath, cleansing yourself off. So, for me, when I do a water ceremony with Joe, he's going to do the same. That's going to cleanse him off. That's going to relax his body, and whatever needs to come out in a positive way. And that's, travel. It's a water song I sang again this morning. Dan San Cho means raven. It's a lake. It says, thank you. Look after us. Again, we're asking that water for that lake to look after us. This is a new song that we got. The young lady by the name of Raven asked me to sing a song about this lake because we have ceremonies there, we have the events there. And the song. Dance and Joby, dance and Joby, dance and Joby. The white Janalia, the white Janalia, oh Janalia. And tu so the hoa hong den, and tu so the hoa hong den, tu so hoa That's a Joby. That's a Joby. That's a Joby. The whole Janahelia. The whole Janahelia. The whole Janahelia. And you to so the Wahonten. And to so the Wahonten. And to so Wahonten. Oi ho, oi ho, oi ho, oi ho.
We often think about the drum in our culture as the heartbeat of Mother Nature. And we, as people of the planet, that's what we are. Tsekpotin means we're the river people. As you see, some of the pictures you see. Salmon, we're heavily dependent on salmon as our main source of food. As Indigenous people in British Columbia, there was a lot of First Nations there and lots of different nations. And we learned, I learned at an early age that that's how our dip netting, Farwell Canyon, that out of all the First Nations, we ate more sockeye than any other First Nation in British Columbia. It's like, how can that be? We're in the interior, we're almost dead center of British Columbia. There's all these First Nations up and down the coast. Then I realized all the First Nations along the coast, they get sockeye, they get cod, they get shrimp, they get lobster, they got all of the ocean has offered. The interior, what do we get? Sockeye. Sockeye and more sockeye. So that's all we ate, sockeye. So we're very, so having clean water is very, it's a big part of clean water is have clean water and have a strong environment. We value water more than just about anything else. We fought the Taseko mine. Why did we fight the Taseko mine? They wanted to use the tailings pond. Taseko mine would have been the largest copper and gold mine in North America, not just in Canada. From the open pit mine from rim to rim would have been 3 kilometers across. So we were going to, and then the tailings pond was fish, what place we call Fish Lake, Taltonby in our language. They were gonna wipe that lake right out. That lake happens to be the top 10 fishing lake in British Columbia. So I don't know what kind of technology you white people have, but if you have the technology to create another top 10 fishing lake in British Columbia, why are you guys in the mining business? Like, so we wouldn't put a price on clean water is worth more than gold. I was thirsty when I came in, so I had a bottle of a drink here. So I don't think gold would have tasted the same or had the same effect. So for us, clean water is a big part of our fight. We fought the Taseko mine twice. Twice we went to the Canadian environmental assessment process, and we won both times. And we did so when Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party was Prime Minister in Canada, the most pro-industry Prime Minister we've ever had. We beat them the first time when everybody said we didn't have a chance. For the Conservative Party, and they were choked. Had a bunch of Indians beat them. So they gutted out all their environmental regulations. Taseko went again. The first time in the history of Canada that they looked at the same project twice. Everybody told us, oh boy, you guys, there's no way you guys are going to win this time. You guys, you should just sign a business deal right now. You ain't gonna stop this. Taseko mine come in there. Like we own the Canadian government. Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party are pro-industry. We own provincial government. Gordon Campbell, the most pro-industry premier BC's ever had. You guys don't have a chance against us. Well, you asked them about a partnership. Oh no, we don't give money to Indians. No. We're gonna get what we want, so tough luck. Well, I don't know how Taseko feels now. Or an example of what you shouldn't do when you're dealing with Indigenous people. You know, I think about their involvement in that fight and getting to know that fight was a large part of our court case win to win Aboriginal title. We won 1,800 square kilometers. It's the only Indigenous land anywhere in Canada. We won Aboriginal title. And only Indigenous people in Aboriginal title in Canada or anywhere in the world. Groups asked us to travel internationally, wherever. From here, I'm heading to Sweden to meet with the Samoa people. You know, they're fighting a mine. They want to hear from us and stuff. So. What did you guys win off? I'm often asked, what did you guys win? I say, you know, that benefit will happen for a long time. But the biggest thing that we won, hope for better quality of life. You know, in Canada, we have just a little over a year ago, 215 graveyards were found outside Kamloops, British Columbia. About 3 hours, 350 kilometers from where we live, a residential school. At one point in time, Canada said, we're gonna create schools in Canada. We're gonna send all the Indian kids and give them an education. We're gonna take the Indian out of the child. You know, a lot of these kids were abused, every form of abuse you could imagine. And we could never talk about that. Never, up until about a year ago. 215, and that isn't the whole property that was scammed. That was only a small portion of the property that was scammed. Since then, other residential schools in Saskatchewan and other places in British Columbia have been have also taken under the ground penetrating radar and discovered even more bodies, unmarked graves. Unmarked graves in Canada? Doesn't sound right. Nobody talks about that because it's happened to Indigenous people. So we talk about Canada, friendly Canada. Oh, they got their human rights record is great. Well, yeah, maybe not if you're an Indigenous person. Oh, that's why we fought. That's why we fought. You know, what does it cost to get to the Supreme Court of Canada? 120, 140 million dollars. What we said. Any other nation coming now, I said, well, lawyer fees have gone up. You know what I'm saying? It's so I hope you got about 200 million. It's a big gamble. But in British Columbia, we had BC treaty process, but we chose not to go that route because you had to give up all the rights. You had to surrender all your Aboriginal rights away before they allow you to sit at that table. That's the only thing we have. It's all we got. You know, you want to negotiate, you got to find leverage. You're going to have to sign away all your leverage. That doesn't make sense. Why would we do that? That's the only thing we have left. And why are we negotiating land claim with British Columbia? It should be with Canada. Treaties are nation to nation. A lot of things didn't add up. But that's life in Canada. Like, you know, you have all these regulations, rules, but when it comes to Indians, you know, they come up with policies out of nowhere. So no, we're not doing that. We're going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and however long it takes. Just about all First Nations in British Columbia doing well. Why are you guys doing that? Like, everybody will have Aboriginal right settlement before you guys get anywhere with the Supreme Court of Canada. Well, that's fine. It's not a race. If everybody else has a wonderful agreement and we're the only ones left, well, we'll just borrow from everybody's agreement and come up with the best. You know, and years later, we 2014, we win Aboriginal title. And all of the bands that were in the BC treaty process, except for 2 or 3 of them, none of them signed any treaties. So the turtle does actually win the race. Now they come to us asking for advice. But what we've done is done the impossible. We've on Aboriginal title. We were told, you know, every nation in Canada, not just British Columbia, every First Nation in Canada, every Aboriginal rights lawyer in Canada told us you guys have no hope of winning. And if you guys move forward and lose, you're going to make it even more difficult for First Nations to win in the future. when we were, we said that we were, it was late at night, just the night before we were, you know, you get over 20 years, 22 years or whatever it was, 23 years, just to have one day in the Supreme Court of Canada, one day, 23 years. You wake up that one day, man, I didn't wake up on the wrong side of the bed today. Because I waited a long time for this. That's pretty much your whole career. They tried to start us out during those years. They would say only bands that are in the treaty process are eligible for these funds. We couldn't apply for a lot of that. So continued. We gotta get really creative doing all that stuff. But here we are the night before 6 Chilcotin bands. 6 bands. And my community is Clinton and we're 42% of the nation. And I've been telling the story since I got to here, like a couple of groups. But you guys being young students, I'll tell you exactly how it went. I won't sugarcoat it like I had for the other groups I talked to. They finally tracked me down, and I went into the room and I sat down. What's up? Thought it was really strange. Everybody was in there. It was like 10:30 at night. Told me we're going to withdraw the case. Every law firm, Aboriginal law firm, every nation, and every Aboriginal organization in Canada doesn't believe we're going to win. They're telling us to withdraw. So we're going to withdraw. Oh, I was fuming. I was fuming. I was like, you fucking bastards. You guys withdraw this case, I'll kick the shit out of every one of you fuckers. Roger Williams, who was a little earlier, that was standing next to me, the case was in his name. And for a lot of the time, I wasn't chief. I was actually executive director. But a lot of my time was working on this case because it was big interest. And Roger always had the head lawyer in the case, Jack Woodward. Lots of times we argued over lots of different, strategies and stuff. Roger would always side with Jack Woodward, our head lawyer. Roger, I'll kick the shit out of you twice. Only times we argued, not once did you ever side with me, always sided with Jack. So you I'm gonna kick the shit out of twice. Kind of calmed down, and I said, you know what it means to be Chilcotin? It means to fight for what we believe in. In 1864, we had 5 chiefs that were executed. In 1865, one more executed. At the conclusion of the Chilcotin War, we were only one of 2 nations that declared war on white people. But under a flag of truce, they said they wanted to meet and negotiate with us. So our war chiefs, our head war chief, Lata Singh, said he wanted to exercise that option. Said we owe it to our people. A lot of our warriors disagreed with him. Said it's trickery. We don't want to just keep fighting. But under a flag of truce, he went into camp, and where him and his fellow chiefs and his son were jumped, shackled, brought to Cornell and executed. And I told our chiefs, you know, our ward chiefs they were executed. They paid the ultimate price to have whatever rights and benefit. That highway through British Columbia would have gone from Victoria to Campbell River and through Butte Inlet straight up through our territory. But because of the Chilcotin War, they rerouted from Victoria to New Westminster up the Fraser Canyon. By doing that, they actually preserved our culture, a lot of our customs. But they paid the ultimate price. You chiefs, when it comes to your time, and you cross over into the next work, you're going to run into these chiefs, and they're going to ask you, and they're going to tell you, we paid the ultimate price. Why didn't you guys fight? Because in your time, they didn't execute Indians anymore. Yet you guys were too afraid. The fight that's Chilcotin, and we're warlike people. We're part of the Dene Athabascan indigenous language speaking people. We're the most southern Dene people. And our role was to move south and obtain land, and the other Dene nations behind us would move and follow. And we're still doing that. But we're using the courts now. We've gone from battlefield shifted to the courtroom. Paper ballot. Ballpoint pen text. No longer tomahawk and bow and arrow. The battle's still going. We're still fighting. So as Chilcotin, we have to stand up for what we believe is right. And being Chilcotin, it's right. It's not wrong. They created residential schools to make us feel ashamed of ourselves. They try to make us ashamed of our custom. That's why wherever we go, we do a little ceremony. It doesn't have to be big. We're proud people. We might not have much, but we're proud of who we are, where we come from. So we may not win. But if we don't win, it doesn't mean you guys are going to show up and Monday morning when you get home, you're not going to wake up and suddenly find that your skin has gone white. You're still going to be Chilcotin. You're still going to be, and we will lick our wounds and we'll come back to find a new strategy. And we'll fight again. Chilcotin needs to fight, not whether we win or lose. Muhammad Ali would have never been the great champion if he was afraid to lose. He lost some fights in order to learn to become the great champion that he was. How many times I've told that story in fighting for our Aboriginal rights. When you're done, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But we have to know that we're doing the right thing because all we want is a better quality of life. Before contact, we relied on all the natural resources in our territory. To create the type of life that we wanted to live. And we lived the way we wanted to live. We had, for example, obsidian rock. You can track that to its origin. You'll find Enham Peak obsidian rock in Saskatchewan. You go north to Northwest Territory in the Yukon, you'll find Enham Peak obsidian. You go south into the States, you'll find Enham Peak obsidian as far south as New Mexico. But we had a big, huge trade network. I find that pretty amazing, especially Nowadays, we have social media and we don't have that. Oh, that's back then. They had it, they didn't have social. Right now. We want access to that. We don't want to continue to keep living on the Indian Reserve land in Canada. Our tribal council was formed in 1989. In the history of our tribal council, we've only had 2 tribal chiefs, Irvin Charlie Boy and myself. Irvin was tribal chair for 18 years. And I remember one of his favorite quotes was that he would always tell government whenever we'd end up at that over glorified concentration camp you call Indian Reserve. I don't know how else he would say that. No way. You have to fight sometimes. Sometimes, you know, our rights stuff are our views because we allow it to happen. I have to stand up for that. So we need to be so we're doing. Preserve our culture, our way. We've learned the Chilcotin country. Lived there generations. So we need to incorporate that traditional generational knowledge. We want access to those natural resources again. We want to benefit from that. We don't want to keep waiting year after year and hope that Ottawa is going to get it right this year. Maybe they'll get our education right this year. Maybe they'll get our housing right this year. Maybe they'll get our social. No, we want to generate our own revenues, build up our own pots. Seiscotin problems require Seiscotin solutions. That depend on anybody else to look after us. That's been happening. Canada did that with the residential schools, as I mentioned earlier. They're going to provide free education to our kids. Send us off. I'll find all these unmarked graves. You know, families that have lost parenting skills because generations of children that have been taken away from their parents. Parents and elders today living that will blame themselves for allowing their children to be taken away. You know how helpless our people felt. Yet to continue to move forward. I look at our people and all the trauma they've been through and all that. A lot of times I think, you know, and yet when you come into an Indigenous family, clan, home, celebration, they're all so easy to, you know, share a smile. Through all that trauma, and yet we have a lot of work to do, a lot of healing to do. That's why we fought for Aboriginal right? Why? I think of that and reminded them as Chilcotin chiefs that night before. And I have to say, once all those lawyers and nations found out we weren't going to back down, then they got to work the night before. Most of them stayed up all night. They strategized on how they would fight and argue in the Supreme Court the next day. And it felt right. Canadians, you could feel they wanted a change. You can't continue to keep mistreating Indigenous people the way you are. When governments failed to do the right thing, industry failed to do the right thing, the court stepped in. They're all Canadians, regardless of who pointed them. They would see all the news articles that were coming out. Even today, I've met Justin Trudeau several times. You know, Canada will not see its full potential until it incorporates but it improves its relationship with Indigenous peoples. A lot of Indigenous peoples aren't opposed to the big projects that are proposed in their territories. What they're opposed to is that, which you won't hear in the media, is that they want to move forward with those big projects for the benefit of the economy and jobs and all of that stuff. What they're not saying is that they want to do that without including any benefits to those Indigenous people. And I'm here to say, I would never allow any resource extraction in my territory without us being involved. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you do is you walk through each other's doors. Taseko Mine, where we fought with, that we own the CEO for Taseko Mine, Russ Halbauer, just before COVID hit. I ran into him in the airport in Vancouver, and in the first time in 25 years, he walked across the airport and talked to me. Said he'd like to have a meeting. I said, "Wow, I think you're maybe 25 years too late." We wanted to talk to you then. There's no way I'll talk to you now. We'll work something out. What's political suicide? Maybe the next generation will take what things and maybe they'll do it. In the meantime, the gold and copper will remain in the ground. That's what we call First Nation Bank. Still in the ground. Safe. If they do and technology improves, there's no risk to the water, and they can move forward with it. So that's our story and where we are situated in British Columbia. I'm a 5th generation chief. And my grandfather, Casimir, was hereditary chief. So the honor of my family is I'm not a hereditary chief. My cousin Kirby is a hereditary chief. I come from that family, and I think of my grandfather and people like that. So I have to bring that and always honor that and bring those values of that hereditary traditional system into the elected process that I've been elected to. When I was a worker, PNG, that was my role. My mom grew up in that hereditary process, and my teachings as a chief started when I was 8 years old. As it mean to be a chief and all of that. So when I was working at TNG, and roadblock started for protection of Brittany Triangle, which eventually led to becoming our original right entitlement. My role in that team was to make sure that the communities continued to fight together, as we've always done as Chincoan people. Always recognized the need that as a nation, we need to work together. A lot of nations in Canada, but not a lot of nations. Most nations in Canada have all split up to one another. They don't work. The northern Shuswap, southern Shuswap, it's like, why do you guys split up? We recognize there's a lot of times we don't agree with each other as Chincoan people. But we always recognize the need to work together, no matter what. When chiefs change, time, stuff, things will be better. We're going to get way more working together than we ever will working independently. So my role was to make sure that that was always honored to continue to work together. Because my teaching started when I was 8 years old, I was well rehearsed in Chilcotin customs practices. When we went to the Supreme Court of Canada, we had to prove not only that we were on the land, but that we were also very structured, that we had, just because our history is not a written history, doesn't mean we didn't have a lot of I think our government process was way more complicated than the Canadian process today. It's very complex. So that was my role, to know and understand that. And we had lawyers that were excellent lawyers, and they did their lawyer duties, and some of the best Aboriginal lawyers you can find in Canada. We had experts, writers, PR people. This big fight was also, Canadian governments wanted you to believe a certain way. Well, we also want you to believe the general public. What's the real story? Stuff. So there are these tragedies around them. But my role was almost like, say, as a traditional lawyer, almost, because I would always look at those and be part of this tragedy in terms of this Canadian law over here kind of mimics our belief system. So that'll work. So strategize up how we're going to make that happen. Because every step, when the junior lawyer, not quite a lawyer yet, comes out and then does the interview with our elders, that interview, there's a bit loss from the elder to the junior lawyer. That junior lawyer takes that information to the regular community company lawyers. There's a bit lost again. And then after rewording and stuff, that lawyer takes it to their senior lawyers. There's a bit lost again. That lawyer takes it to the lawyer that's going to step into that courtroom. There's quite a bit lost again. And hopefully you just have enough code enough that it'll be enough to win you court case. So that was my role, to make sure. One small example I often use is our team had a strategy. How are we going to deal with our elders? A lot of our elders say Tsakotin is their first language. They have to have translators and stuff. Our customs, we don't question our elders, so we don't ask a lot of the same questions over and over. But when you go to that courtroom, they're going to cross-examine you, they're going to hit you and hit you and hit you. You're going to get annoyed. And our lawyers, they didn't want to put me on the stand because they were afraid I might lose it on some lawyer out there. So they kept me up. What about our elders? We have 29 elders that testified in our court case. 29 elders. And that was a big hurdle. Our team had how to approach that. I told them, we tell our elders. Don't tell them, these old white guys, lawyers, they'll be questioning you. They're not smart people. They're going to come to you guys. They're going to ask you questions, and they're not really going to get it. So they're going to ask you in a different way, and they're not going to really get it, and they're going to keep asking you like that. So when our elders were up on the stand and these lawyers started cross-examining, our elders were kind of smiling, like, just about everyone said, "You were right. They aren't very smart at all. They asked me the same question 10 different ways." They'd laugh at the lawyers. But in every case, they would also say, you guys had Aboriginal rights. We acknowledge all that, but when's the last time you've practiced your Aboriginal right? And they wanted to say, see, I've practiced it in 10 years, you've lost your right. In every case, our witnesses that sat up there said in less than a week, I did this. I remember Doris Lulua. She'd never recognized Indian Reserve land. She'd always lived in areas that we call Crown land, but that was her family clan area. Her and her sister and her brother, they lived there. She was like 75 years old. And they had a really hard time to convince her to travel. The farthest she's been away was like Williams Lake, which is only 2-3 hours away. But to go all the way to Victoria, like, they finally had me go over and convince her, I need you. Tell that story and how you lived and all that. And she finally said, if you come and support me while I'm down there, then I'll go. I said, sure, I'll go support you. Unfortunately, I never made it to Victoria while she was on the stand. She testified and they told her. She said, yeah, 3 days before I left for here, I went out on horseback. She's a 75-year-old lady. I went out on horseback. I took my 22 and I shot a deer and I brought it home so that my sister Madeline and my brother Casimir were both close to 80 years old. So they don't run out of meat while I'm gone and away. A 75-year-old lady gets on horseback in Canadian wilderness and shoots a deer. So in every case, the way the Canadian lawyers, they stopped the argument right there. She was ready to scalp me when I got she got home. She ran into me. But it was a good thing that she saw some black-tailed deer on Vancouver Island. Black-tailed deer, they don't grow like that. She saw some black-tail and they're really small. And she got the biggest kick out of that. I never knew deer would be that small. Like you can have so much fun, you can shoot so many of them. They're about the size of my dog. So that kind of saved me. I didn't get scalped. But that's our history. That's our story, and that's the. At this point, I like speaking to universities. An openness, students that are wanting to learn. I think for those of you that have chosen to come speak, I think it's going to benefit you guys in ways you guys won't imagine. That's in Canada, I tell Justin Trudeau, and this is a chance for you to hit that reset button on your relationship with Indigenous people in Canada. You can be the role model for all these other countries and around the world that have Indigenous peoples. That has to happen. Indigenous people everywhere are going to continue to stand up for their rights, and the more cases like ours, the more confidence they're going to get. So, as young people, you're going to be part of that change. Okay. I never wanted any of our youth ever to go through what I had to go through. When I started my career, you go into a meeting and you even mention Aboriginal right, you get kicked right out of that meeting. You get escorted out. You know, Canada, we used to have for the Conservative Party, we had a party that used to be called the Reform Party. Party of nothing but racists. Tribal Chairman Irvin showed up and told me to attend that one forum they were having, the Reform Party down at Elks Hall. I went in there. Like, halfway in the meeting, I was like, boy, this is getting pretty hot here. I don't know if finally leaned over Irvin. I said, Irvin, just you and I are the only Indians in this room. Like 500 white guys. He reached into his briefcase and he lifted up his paper and he had a little Colt 38 sitting there. Like, ouch. I see you brought some backup. Get out of here. That's the environment we grew up in. So when Canada talks about being a perfect country, we haven't seen it. We have to fight for everything we get. I would still fight. We have Aboriginal title. So we want better agreements. Per capita, how much money do we have to serve our members versus any other municipality or stuff? We've done so much for so little. We're almost qualified to do almost anything for nothing. Still people want statements they used to make. I think times are changing. One of the reasons I'm here is that's opened the door for other opportunities. And now we have one of the largest logging companies in Williams Lake. Log, and not only do we do logging, we do rehabilitation work, forestation. Last year we planted over 1 million trees. We're planting another over trees again. 2017, we had two of the three largest fires in our territory. Shell Canada stepped up and one of the first carbon offset projects in Canada. Part of that, not sure exactly how that all worked, but now we have that experience. And that's why I'm here. The Hague. We'll see Shell International. It's also given me a chance to stop by and speak a little to you guys. I'd also like to bring in my wife, who's also a speaker, speaks a lot about Indigenous rights through the lens of Indigenous women. One of the most sought out speakers on that issue of murdered missing women in Canada, and I think it would be beneficial for us to hear. But before that, if there's any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have to decide which one I'll start with.
Okay.
I'll just do the one that's at the top. Thank you so much for speaking. Absolutely honored. I have dozens of questions I can choose from, but the first will be something that I share with Christine, speaking about our own education in Canada and how narrowly we're educated about our own history. But now in my classroom, I have a new generation and some Canadian students as well. I pose this question to them as well. Having lived abroad so long, I'm wondering how you've found this recent process of truth and reconciliation more broadly for Canada, whether or not you feel there's been positive impact from that, and what parts of those positive impacts, if any, can be transported as you move around and share this abroad.
Truth and reconciliation, I think it's a positive move doing that. I think it's going to take time before they see all of those things implemented. I hear a lot of criticism even from Indigenous people across Canada. A lot of our people are so caught up in always fighting and resisting. It's hard for them to switch gears out of that. And when there's a change in government, you got a party like the Conservative Party that had governed for so long, it's going to take time to shift a lot of those policies out, stuff like that, just like any other government. think a lot of the moves that the Liberal government in Canada is doing, I think are positive, but it's gonna take a while. It's, water issues, for example, on the Indian Reserve lands. I think it's improved quite substantially, but it's still gonna take a good 10 years before all of that's gonna be resolved.
From the learning perspective as well, before we even get to implementation, do you find that there's been a positive change there beyond? It's been so long since I've been home. I wonder, in comparison to the kind of education I got, how things might be changing culturally for us as a whole.
I think it varies from region to region. Like I was saying earlier, you know, most countries you go to, wherever you go, if you're abroad and stuff, there's a lot of diversity. But same thing in Canada, you go to Vancouver, there's a lot of diversity, but you go up into the area where I come from, there's virtually no diversity. And in those cities, it's the racism that you're gonna see is, and the willingness to change isn't there. So I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think the process is there. You know, there's laws and policies, for example, I remember one of the first policies that was implemented when after our court case was Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party, implemented a bill that all levels of government, federal governments, had to recognize Aboriginal rights. And I was like, wow. You know how much of my career I've spent when government people were walking into our boardroom, that we'd have to spend so much time trying to convince these government workers that we had Aboriginal rights. Not even mention Aboriginal title, just Aboriginal rights. Like you spent 3/4 of your meeting trying to convince them. And then you get into the discussion and then the meeting time is over. You finally feel like you're making headway with them, and then they do a shuffle or they send somebody out of town, and then you have to start right from scratch all over again. Just that one policy change, I was like, wow, that's huge. That was so much of my time. So I think, you know, there's changes on its way. Maybe not as fast as we all wanted, but it's on its way.
I'm curious also, I spent some time in Vancouver and also on Vancouver Island. And I remember when I came there as well, part of this it was also Indigenous-led movement against old growth logging on Vancouver Island specifically. And I remember there that there was, they always did a land acknowledgement. And that's also something that I've seen change also, I guess, in politics, that they have started doing the land recognizing that now we are on unceded land that was never given up. And that's especially British Columbia as, I think, the biggest area that was never given away sort of to the crown. I'm sort of curious because I know specifically in British Columbia, there's a lot of sort of issues still going on with, sort of resource extraction. So both the pipeline that's going through Wet'suwet'en territory, and then you have the old growth logging as well. Do you think that your win will also have an effect on these challenges as well?
I think a lot of that stuff stems from our win. You know, land acknowledgement and all of that it's being more acceptable today because of our, it has speeded up the reconciliation process. It's essentially, we wouldn't even be close to where we're at today if it wasn't for our win. Canada didn't even accept UNDRIP. Our case forced them to accept that. So I think that's a big part. You know, And you look at what's out and issuing pipelines there. It's funny how the media paints things. You know, you listen to the media and you believe that 100% of what's out are against the pipeline. But in reality, there's two levels of leadership in what's out in the nation. One is an elected process, whereby all 100% of the elected process have signed agreements with that pipeline. And then the hereditary system, there's actually two different hereditary, and one hereditary system has agreements with the pipeline.
Mm.
And there's a small portion of hereditary chiefs that don't. But I give them credit because they've done a really good job with the media, how you can twist things to make people believe that that small little group has everyone thinking that 100% of the Wet'suwet'en are against that, but when the reality is 3/4 of all leadership have an agreement with the pipeline, and only 1/4 don't. So,
Yeah.
I say, put them all in their big log house and don't let them leave until they work it out. That's a Wet'suwet'en issue. So if you say, I'm with the Wet'suwet'en, I'm against the pipeline, in reality, we're doing more to allow there to be a continued divide. So can't always believe what the media is saying. Hear media stuff, I'm always like, what are they not saying? Anytime I speak to the media, I always give them a lecture that they have a duty and a responsibility. You know, a lot of Canadians depend on them to paint the picture for them. A lot of people have a lot of trust in them, and they have their own prejudice. So when I'm meeting with media, I make sure to be very clear with them on that.
We have also questions from the people online. So shall we pay attention to their questions? Because don't forget, we have more people having listened to your expose. Do you want to go for it?
Yes, so Tamara has 2 questions online and she says, thank you for your talk. Are there ways that Indigenous knowledge about how to build community with positive relationships to water and land, as well as other ways to govern, can be shared with members of the dominant, in brackets, white groups?
I didn't get the question.
She asks, are there ways to share knowledge about how to build communities with positive relationships to water and land with the dominant groups? It's about sharing knowledge and how that would work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always ways of sharing, and we're doing all we can to share as much of our expertise. And I think that's one of the things that I would often say, and will say here even a little later when I introduce White as a speaker. One of the things we believe is we can be critical of government for not knowing enough about our culture, but we have to also ask ourselves, are we doing enough in sharing about our knowledge and our way of being? So we have to be willing to put ourselves out there. And like as I mentioned earlier, she's a consultant and she's developed online platform program that teaches people on our values, our way of being, and our history. And I think that's something that should be incorporated into every aspect of government. It's one of the best programs I've seen. It's really important. Where does prejudice come from? Lack of knowledge. So best thing we have is education. So best thing we can do is educate people on our customs. You get a lot of people say, well, I grew up beside an Indian reserve, but yet they're the people that know the least about us. Get to know us. Come be part of our ceremonies. Just read about it.
Yeah, also,
As a follow-up to that question.
go
like,
ahead.
is-
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Be that person. Wondering if you could talk or speak to the future obstacles that are still left to be faced. And I say this gingerly also for my own position, but perhaps if there is a role for Euro descendants, et cetera, particularly in Canada and abroad, to be played, is it a role to stand back and get out of the way? Is it an active role? And if so, is it something that Euro descendant people need to find out for themselves, or is there maybe worth qualifying? I'm taking that position from the BLM movement, and a lot of people in that movement felt it was time for those Euro descendant people to step up and take their own initiative. And it was time for the Black community to step back and say, we're doing enough for ourselves. We don't need to also be teaching you how to come and stand with us. I'm just wondering if that perhaps is too harsh a stance, or if there is a role, what that role might be.
Well, it depends on how far you are as a nation in your healing journey. We have a lot of healing. There's many layers to it. Lost a lot in terms of parenting skills, and parents don't know how to parent, and how's that going to affect the generations coming behind us and stuff. So, it's all up to each nation. There's always room. We've always been open as Chilcotin people, bringing new blood into our nation. We're not opposed to having, whether they're white people, red people, yellow people, black people in our territories. But what we want is that they respect and honor us as a people. They honor and respect our belief system, our spirituality. We don't judge any group of people coming into our territory on the types of religion they have. In some cases, we've incorporated some of their beliefs into our belief system. And I think there has to be that openness. I think there's some very interesting beliefs and religious views all over it, but I don't think any one nation has all the answers. And the more you can learn about others, the better off you are. It's like any issue, any challenge that you have, or angles you can look at that issue, the better off you're going to be. So.
Just a follow-up question as well from Tamara. She asked, do you see a willingness to learn from the Chilcotin that goes even further than recognition of rights?
Yeah, it's got to go beyond recognition. Let's incorporate our belief system into the everyday management. In 2017, 2 of the largest forest fires in Canada happened right around my reserve. And what did I learn from that? Well, that years and years of forest mismanagement has caused that issue. I don't ever want to see that again. So I vowed that I'm going to have a say on how that forest is managed, so that we don't ever have that type of crisis ever again. 2017, we were told that we have fire, that we had to evacuate. We didn't evacuate. We became the first First Nation in Canada to ever say no to evacuation order. We fought fire, forest fire, generation after generation. We know how to live. Get on social media and everybody was like, oh, them Indians are all gonna perish and they're all gonna burn up and all this stuff. We saved our community. If we hadn't left, we'd left and followed that evacuation, I figure we would have lost 60 to 70 homes. We would have never recovered. We don't have a lot, but what we have, we're proud of. You know, other nations phone me and ask me, and I tell them, you know what? We got a lot of heavy equipment, loggers. We built fire guard after fire guard over it. And in between our fire guards, we burnt all the trees off. So that fire took a run at us. Stopped it. People don't be scared to burn that back burn. You know, it's like those trees will grow back faster than Canada will build you new homes. So I think we have to incorporate our beliefs and bring back. Name me one thing Canada's managed in our area that they've done a good job on. Nothing. Our most populations are dwindling. Our deer populations are dwindling. If you get up in this country, or where's our mountain goats? Where's our mountain sheep? You know, those sockeye is, you know, last summer was the first year in 5 years we had a dip net fishery for sockeye. So name me one thing they've managed. I tell my people that the real challenge is actually our own people. Make your own people believe you can actually do this. That's the challenge. Whether or not our traditional laws is a good thing for the environment, I know it is. Canada won't see its full potential until it incorporates that into every aspect of their government.
Can I ask one question about, because you mentioned the difference between hereditary chief and normal chief. So explain the structure, how that the representation works.
Hereditary system is father to son to son to son, oldest son usually. Regular chief is elected.
Okay.
I'm elected. I come from a hereditary family. I'm not hereditary, but I have an election every 2 years. Some First Nations say create a custom election, make it 4 or 5 years, but less. I tell Mom, I'm okay with every 2 years. If anything, I change it every 6 months, I tell them. Then I know where everybody's position is every 6 months, so, you know, wouldn't give them time to, allow them time to change their mind. If I made it 5 years, by the time the 5th year, 5 years finally came along, I wouldn't know where their positions were, so this keeps everyone honest. Well, I think it's, you get the right person in, then 5 years isn't long enough. You get the wrong person in, then 2 years is too long. So.
And it's usually the hereditary chief and the chief that makes the sort of decision for the.
Hereditary chiefs are still a lot of times acknowledged, but they're no longer. That's been taken away from them by Canadian government. That's all administration and stuff goes through elected chiefs. But a lot of communities will still hold hereditary chiefs in a high place, but they're not in charge of any funds that are related or tied to any government.
said that no other Indigenous people had obtained the Aboriginal title before. Why is that? Was it because there were obstacles, or was it because what you mentioned that they were maybe afraid of losing and then making it even more difficult for First Nations?
Were you asking why nobody's won?
Yeah, before.
No judges granted that. Yeah, they win certain rights, but no judges granted full title until we came. When Delgamuukw came along, they finally recognized First Nation Aboriginal people, that their rights to oral history is finally recognized. So right there was that was our window. We saw that as an opportunity, and finally they're going to recognize our oral history as part of evidence. So we lined up 29 elders. So every case seemed like they prove a couple more things, and the next group comes in and expands out a little farther. Stuff. So some cases didn't ask for title, just only clarification on rights and stuff like that. So.
No question online?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing this. And I wanted to ask, so this university has as its vision that students should be educated to become world citizens. So I'm very grateful that you and your delegation have come to share with us your experiences and tell us about the hardships as Indigenous people. Because yes, obviously it's very important to also hear from other cultures and other than the dominant cultures of the world views. And from an educational perspective, I can imagine there is much importance for your people to preserve the culture, and therefore there should be maybe a very different vision. So my question is, if you were to choose a vision for educating Tsilhqot'in youth, what would be the model or vision? Because could they be raised to become proud Tsilhqot'in and world citizens alike, or does that fight one another?
I'm not sure if I got that right, but I think we need to develop our own curriculum, our own history, teach stuff that Indigenous people. I believe Tsilhqot'in people need to change the way we educate our youth. That classroom style doesn't work for our people. We learn in a different way. Our teaching environment, this is written history stuff, is not our Indigenous way. Just because some of our kids don't adapt to reading or have a hard time understanding English literature, doesn't become. But that's a kid that can't read or whatever, or has a hard time learning under that system. I take them in the bush and I show them something complex out there. They get it right away. So we have to change that. I would love to see that. Love to work towards moving. It's shifting gears. Our nation, we've spent so much time fighting the physical mind, fighting for opportunities. Now we've proven that now it's almost like we have we have to shift gears. Earlier, there was a picture on, look at that picture even now. Those were the chiefs that were chief when we won title. There's only 2 of us left. Also, creating government, creating programs, it's different. It's a whole different tools. We have to shift gears. We have to learn to adapt. And in some ways, it's exciting. Creating things, programs, incorporate our values, our way of doing things. But I kind of miss that fight too. I loved it from the fighting days when you're fighting people's thoughts and process, in a racist redneck town like Williams Lake. I used to have, sometimes we joke around as Joe Cole. So we got nobody left to fight, we might as well fight amongst each other. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I think it's coming from this as well. I'm wondering, is it possible, it's no general, to educate in a way that creates global citizenship while countering hegemonic Eurocentric universality?
I think so. I think there's a way of doing incorporating with, it's mentioned earlier, it's always good to look at things as many different lights as you can to get the full picture. We want to change the way things are done. The way things are done hasn't been good for us. So any change is a good change. I'm not afraid of change. In my career, how many times I've been part of the first time the First Nation has done this. Others are scared. Why be afraid? Why be afraid of another race and their belief system? Why should I be afraid of their heritage? I'm not afraid of that. I want to learn about that. My great grandfather was English descent, came from London. Well, one of the first cattle ranchers in the Chilcotin, white ranchers. I often tease people. I was like, I'm not 100% Chilcotin, I'm a little bit watered down. But I'm in England and I'm like, London. I always wanted to come to London because I got heritage, but God, London is ugly. GP, you got some of them. You got to have really good staff. You have to have good people around you. Find good people and mentor under. JP is somebody that's working with us, fellow back here. All of our fights with mine, they're standing outside the Foundry Square, or whatever they call that. And I'm like looking up and I see these statues. Look at those freaking lions. Like, the hell's the matter? What's with those lions? Lions they're not nature to England, like England have lions. Why are they using lions? GP's got this long history of chiefs and how they, not chiefs, but kings and queens and the royalty and what their belief on lions. I don't care. Lions don't fucking come from England. Why the hell are they using lions? As native people, my place were Raven clan. Raven is what represents us. And under the Raven clan, we have the Raven again. Then we have a Wolf clan, the Bear clan, and the Otter clan. And we also believe that under that, every individual person also has a spirit animal, a guide, spirit animal camp. And if you're a healer, such as somebody like Cecil who come up here earlier, we may have more than one guide animal. So I'm a chief. I come from a hereditary family, so I would have more than one guide animal stuff. So all the nations, it seems like they all have animals and stuff. So as guides, so I find that interesting. So there's a lot of similarities, but even still, I still don't get why the lion.
Contact that. Like all the good things we have, including lions.
No, but the lion is the king of the jungle, no?
Yeah.
So it's more its royalty.
They get that
The
lion
lion.
because they're not in the jungle.
No, I know, but I don't know.
It's also so wrong.
I don't know.
We also have a lion in our royal house.
Yes. There's
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, and but a French motto. So it's not in our own language. The motto that goes with the weapon, the coat of arms.
Yeah.
So the coat of arms animal is a lion, and the motto is in French. So, but we were also ruled by the French at some point. So it's interesting. We combine the.
Yeah, I find all of those things to be really interesting. You know, it's at the end of the day, you know, so many days you go to the Supreme Court, you go into those courtrooms, and you know, it's really belittle. I don't know how you say that. You know, these are supposed to be top lawyers in Canada, representing Canada, top lawyers in British Columbia, and yet they're up there in courtrooms. A lot of times after spending a day in that courtroom, just go for a long walk. Just wash that away. You know, it'd be like, and I would get really upset. Even today, I'd get really upset. Especially when the First Nation would come along, the nomadic ways of my ancestors. Yes, people were never nomadic. They always knew where they were at. They always did. You know, and savages, which they call us, savages. They're like before contact. In the spring we lived here. The summer we lived there. Fall we lived there. In the winter we lived there. The next year we'd start the same all over again. Before contact, we had 4 or 5 homes per family. Today, under this modern way, this way that's been introduced to us, we have 4 or 5 families living in one home. Completely backwards. Nomadic are people have always known where they are. So don't ever call your people nomadic or tell them. They always start being disrespectful to your ancestors. Always where they were going and where to get whatever resources they need within their territory. I want to call up my wife too.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to frame this question. You touched a little on heritage and not being, for having British roots, let's say. What is your advice, or what do you think of people who have indigenous roots, but which has been successfully, or the identity has been successfully erased within their own countries?
I think as indigenous people, you know, if our identity or customs been erased, whatever, somebody's lost their language, you know, I still, even as individual people, I've had a lot of indigenous people come to me You know, they've never known their community or their nation. They've never been there. They grew up in their third, fourth generation living in the city. And, you know, it's almost like they're ashamed that they've lost that. Don't be ashamed. You know, the most indigenous thing you can do, and nobody will ever take that away from you, is how you feel about yourself. You want to practice them? Go for a nature walk. There's nothing more indigenous than to walk in nature. Somewhere, so find a place where there's no concrete. Go for a walk. As you go for a walk, meditate. You don't know what your custom is, but when we pray, it's more like speaking. Start with that. Share that. Don't be afraid to ask. You know, it's amazing, no matter what nationality you go to, if you need help, you ask. People are willing to come out and help you. Same thing with indigenous families. Well, see some a spiritual person, he has friends that he goes to. They're from other indigenous groups and nations as well. If he gives them a call, then they'll drive halfway across the province just to meet him. Not ask for anything. Coming from a sincere place, people are willing to help. If there's a willingness to learn, you'll learn. Others will share. Maybe you've lost all that, but maybe there's elders from neighboring nation that still remember some of the practice you guys used to do. It's a good start. Some of our practices, you get more into that. I often say we haven't lost our practices. They're still sitting in that same place. Our ancestors learned that in our dreams. Well, it depends on how rooted you become back into your culture, back into your way of being. As humans, our role is to try to create a better person for yourself. That's everybody's journey.
Well, I don't have too much to say because Chief Joe's a hard act to follow. And he usually says things way better than I do. I often say that I'm from the Cla'emin Nation. I'm mixed heritage as well. I'm Cla'emin on my mother's side, which we're part of the West Coast Salish people just off Vancouver Island. And I'm English and Ukrainian on my father's side. So I have one foot in both worlds. And I grew up for the first part of my life in the Cla'emin community with my mom till I was about 7, and then I lived off reserver in the mainstream community until I'm still living in the mainstream community until I met Joe and married into the nation. So my experience in the world as an Indigenous woman is we have similarities, Joe and I, but it's definitely a little bit different. Joe grew up in his community and was fluent in Chilcotin until he was 5 years old. And I really believe that in the formative years as children, like the language and our environment in our early years really impacts how we see the world for the rest of our lives. And so I grew up speaking English, which is, obviously the colonized language for Indigenous peoples. And Joe grew up speaking Chilcotin until he went into the Indian day schools where it was forbidden to speak any Indigenous languages. But for those 5 years that Joe had speaking Chilcotin, I always say that really informs his worldview in the contrast to how, my worldview has been informed. And Joe being in his community for most of his life and around his people and being raised in his culture has really informed and continues to inform his worldview. Like coming to Europe with him for the first time has been fascinating, like about the lions and like the Trafalgar Square and things like that. I'm like, yeah, but that's like, and so we were having the conversation about that and like, and how Scotland's national animal is the unicorn, and you know, because it's a mythical creature, but in the myths it's the only animal that could beat the lion. So it's kind of this like, you know what I mean, like bantering back and forth between the countries. But Joe's like, yeah, I don't care about that, like they don't have lions in London, like it doesn't make sense. So it's just like really interesting, just like his worldview and how he sees the world in comparison to mine. And there's such a diversity of Indigenous peoples in Canada, with over 600 First Nations peoples and 600 First Nation communities across Canada, with over 200 being in British Columbia alone, several Métis settlements, and the Inuit people having lots of communities up in the north and in Newfoundland and the East Coast. So our diversity of how we are as Indigenous peoples is vast, and our experiences and our lived experiences and our worldviews are informed by different cultures and ways of being. We have over 60 language groups in Canada alone, just for Indigenous peoples, and over half of those are in British Columbia. So there's such a diversity of Indigenous peoples, and so, you know, when I met Joe a number of years ago and I've been married to him, like I say that I'm sort of like the academic version of an Indigenous person. And so the way I talk about, you know, Indigenous peoples and how I've learned it has been very different than Joe's experience. I say, like, you're actually living it. Like, I went and studied and learned and traveled to, you know, over 100 Indigenous communities to learn about my culture and to learn about who I am. And so I think it's just interesting, you know, when Joe speaks and talks about things, because he's been living it in the community. And I've been mostly urban and went to university and have a master's degree in intercultural and international communications, and traveled to over 100 First Nation communities in British Columbia and several across Canada and several across the world. So just my experience as an Indigenous person and how I articulate things is very different than Joe's. And I share that with you today just to highlight the diversity of Indigenous peoples. Joe's also a generation up from me, if you haven't noticed. But so he's a generation up and a generation that went to the residential school. Well, he didn't go to residential school, but he went to the Indian day school system, which was similar to the residential schools. And if you were an Indian child living on an Indian reserve, for several generations, it was mandated that you went to these residential schools or Indian day schools. So for generations, those schools had the mandate to kill the Indian and the child. And so to have Joe, like the direct impact of those school systems on that generation up from me, I wasn't mandated to go. By the time I grew up and went to school, I was the first generation in my family to not be mandated to go to residential schools. So that's a privilege in Canada. And it also comes, when you're an Indigenous person and you have privileges, comes great responsibility. And that great responsibility for me is about breaking those cycles of oppression, colonization, discrimination, and genocide. And so my career is really about educating and teaching Canadians and Indigenous and non about that oppression, so that we can learn about it and become informed and make better decisions. And also, when we talk about truth and reconciliation, it's really about, like, how do we be in better relationship together? How are we going to learn about our past, not because we want to dwell there, but so that we're informed and we can make better decisions moving forward, and that we can create a better future, not only for Indigenous peoples, but for all of us, and for our planet, and for the living beings on our planet, and all of that. So I think that that's I feel like that's my responsibility as someone that's a generation down, that, my mom went to residential school, all my family went, and I didn't. So I see that as a responsibility to really, to break cycles, to start like blazing trails so that, we can be global citizens. We can also honor our traditions and our cultures, and weave those into our modern day lives. So I'm going to just leave it there, because I know that we're coming to time. But I do just also, we have some gifts to just thank the organizers for hosting us here today, and for just the generosity of, thinking that our story was important to be here. And it's always wonderful when we're not home to be invited into other people's homes, and to other people's communities. So we're just really grateful for that. So we'll do some gifting, and then maybe we'll ask Cecil to close us with a song, which I think is perfect. And in our ways, how we open is how we close. And so we'll make sure that we opened with a song and that we'll close with a song. And I see that Christine also.
But because I think you also, with your great, what you just told us, what she's not saying is that she created this amazing online course called Day End. I followed it in January, February, and yeah, it was a life opening. It's I recommend it. It's a gift I gave to myself for Christmas and then we have some session also with other people who follow the course, the cohort during those 2 months. It's so important. It's so great, and I'm looking forward for you to make the next edition. But I know how much work it must have to do.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Christine. So I do have this online program that's self-directed. It's called DN, which is a Chilcotin word for a person that has the gifts to transform. And so Joe helped me name the platform, because I'm not really good at naming things. And so I was saying, like, I was telling him about what I wanted to do. And he was saying, like, well, call it DN. Like that, in our language, that's a person who has the gifts to transform. And when we're learning and unlearning and opening ourselves up to education and ways of being and knowing and worldviews, that we give ourselves that opportunity to transform as human beings. And so the DN was a word traditionally used for like medicine and spiritual people in the Chilcotin communities. But what Joe also said is that they believe that everybody is a DN. Everybody has an opportunity to be a DN and to transform. But you have to do that, take those steps to be able to transform. And so this online learning platform provides that opportunity from an Indigenous lens to transform. So you're welcomed into what we call Canadian history through the lens of Indigenous women. And you're welcomed into that perspective through written material, audio, and videos over about an 8 to 10 hour. You have 2 months to do it. It's self-directed. And then we have 2 live online calls through Zoom where we can just connect and ask questions and be in community, and learn from each other. And so through that experience, that's the whole thing, is like, it's an invitation to transform. It's an invitation for you to get in touch with your own DN, with the power to transform. And once we allow ourselves or enable ourselves to have those opportunities, then, our worldview starts to expand. And that's really something special. And as Joe had said earlier, like, that's part of our journey in life as humans, is to become better, to transform, to lift each other up. And Cecil, I don't know if he said it here, but he might have said it in our last session, was really our wealth is not about material things. Our greatest wealth is about helping each other and lifting each other up and being of service. And I feel that's what the organizers, Sylvia and Christine and Micah, have done here for for our small delegation of the Chilcotin is to uplift us as Chilcotin and Indigenous peoples, to uplift us while we're here on these foreign lands. And so we have a couple of gifts, small tokens, because we only have small suitcases with us. So they are smaller tokens, and maybe I'll let Joe just give them out, and then we'll get Cecil to come up and do a song, and if there's any other closing comments. So Joe, if you want to just call up Sylvia.
One of the things that kind of brings to when she speaks our language, me as Indigenous person, Tsilhqot'in, my language, the Chilcotin language is a real humorous language. So I look at the world like I look at it differently. You know, it's definitely, there's the English language is a backwards language. You say it's like black bear. What you know, is it black bear? Language, you know, say, you know, so English language is definitely. But I remember starting to learn on it. They put me in the kindergarten and I couldn't speak English, so they'd have to get my cousins in to translate for me. And was a problem. They'd go to the washroom and I have to get a translator to ask to go to the washroom and stuff. So our day school, it was like they brought these nuns in. They're all French ladies that could barely speak English, and they were the ones trying to teach us English. Teacher got really upset with us once. I taught in Quebec, taught in Ontario, taught in Saskatchewan, taught in Alberta, taught in British Columbia. You guys are the stupidest bunch of kids I've ever taught. And I remember just being shocked. Like I was grade 4, grade 5. I was shocked, and I looked across and my friend Truman Sam sitting there. I was like, he didn't care too much for them teachers either. We always knew we were number one, he says. I was so upset, she started crying. I used to thank Truman all the time. He's awesome now. Guy. But I always thanked him for that. Because right there, you know, grade 4, he taught me a lesson. No matter what circumstances, no matter who it is, somebody that's in authority is telling you something, doesn't mean it's right. You know, and he taught me no matter what they tell you, you can always turn it around and throw it back at them. We always knew we were number one. So, whatever stuff like this. So that's our journey. Anyway, you know, Sylvia. That's a gift. Chana Leon, thank you for allowing us to be here for share our story. Thank you. Token for appreciation. Micah.
It's me, I think. Very special.
Thank you for all of this.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Be out here for our team.
Thank you so much.
Show our appreciation.
Yeah, and allow me to accept it, but to share it with my other colleagues and members of the Center of Governance, but also for presence of our students and other interested people also online. So thank you so much for coming and for having shared the wisdom. Thank you.
I look so serious sitting there looking at all you guys, girls. Sense of humor. We are sense of humor. Our language. We bug each other, you know, how we do stuff in our language. My grandmother, our grandmother, his dad, my mother, our siblings. And when I was a young kid, my grandmother taught me some songs. There's about 4 songs that she taught me. And I lost that I was going to day school. The ones that he's talking about. I went to residential school. I kind of lost all that. Later, I got into government jobs and forgot about that. But my father's people taught me drum back, which my grandmother, when I was a kid growing up, taught me. But I can't remember those songs my grandmother had. Today, I sing some new songs that I create. One of those sense of humor for my grandmother is our drum beat. You're sitting here right now. Backs. Listening, watching TV, or eating. It's your heartbeat. Once you get up and you start walking, heartbeat goes a little faster. Start doing things. Once you start running, playing sports, your heartbeat goes faster. Running around, you're wrestling around, things physically. One day when you fall in love, your heartbeat's gonna be like this. That's the heartbeat we are. Let's continue. We have heartbeat. That's who we are. The cherish that. That's right here in your heart. Just like a baby. Joe was talking about healing. Us we call this the baby basket, we call it chi. For me, I had to heal because of the day school, Greece, residential school. People that hurt us. Today I can talk about it. Sexually abused, spiritually abused, all these forms of abuse that happened. It hurt me and had to heal myself. And like, it took me long. But for me, like I see youth in here. Even you, I see you as youth. I see you this morning. I call you youth. All of you are youth. Pretty well, oldest in here. 16 years old. We're not around. That's all. And today I still play sports. I play volleyball with young guys, young girls. Play competitive. I still play hockey. I still play slow pitch with my daughter. I will go out and compete. Right now my team is 6-0. We're undefeated. They were playing the other night. For me, that's important. Being youth, that's important to me. I have to look after myself too. That heartbeat, that chi that we look after. That's important. Getting to this age, like 16 years old, turn that number around. Yeah, you're gonna be there. Look after yourself. Did you eat? That water ceremony we did, that's important. I'm gonna do a youth song for all of you here. For what you're learning, for what you heard. Joe here. That's important. Too, that's important. To follow him, to look after him. That's just my nature. It's like I said, I go upwards across the province to help people out. I don't ask for money. I just go. I just do it somehow. I get my gas money back. It's kind of different things. Hey, you guys can sit down now. That's going to church, you know, preach something, sit down. That's just a little sense of humor. Today we kind of joke about it in a way. You know, for me, I was raised Catholic. I was instilled right down in me. And I had to learn my culture from my grandfather, what they taught me beyond the Catholic part. That's important. So last while I start getting back into my culture, I start singing and I start doing things. So I put a bit of sense of humor in there. You know, that's us, for Selkirkian people. A lot of First Nations are like that. You know, for me, I'm Selkirkian. That's my language. I'm also Carrier, which is the north of us. That comes from my mother's side. Also Newhawk, which is Bellacool. And again, Joe talked about our great-great-grandfather coming from England. And also from my father's side, there's a Dutch right here on my home. That's something that I have to acknowledge. So when I acknowledge that, all the bloods that I have to put it like this and work it together. Good way. So be proud of who you are and what you are. For me, first, I'm Selkirkian. Liitje, jastek, kundeni siteniisiä. Ryhteni, nendeni hostiin, and siitä testin näistä ylhäädystiin also GM. And people that raised me, taught me how to speak the language, how to fish, how to hunt, all these different things on the land that we do. That's what they taught me. That's my language, and I'm proud of it. So. Doing this work, I get tired. Like after that work, like after Chastity, that's tired work. That's what I do. I go to other communities when I do that work. Often this community right here, they ask me to do that work. I don't get 45 minutes time in hour time. Sometimes it takes me 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Sometimes it takes me a whole day to work on that song or that person. I get tired. So I have to look after myself in a good way. So look after yourself, what you're learning, how you're going to help people out. You go out. That's important. If you don't look after yourself, what's going to happen here? To achieve that big basket that you have put that heart back in. I look after that heart. Start sticking. It happens. You're 6 feet under. Okay. How are you going to look after people? How are you going to look after people if you don't look after your body? being healthy. It's like that, I'm 16 years old and I still play all those sports, all these different things I try to do. Again, for me, it's my nature to look after people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, that'd be about $100 each.
That was, I think, the sense of humor. We have few drinks prepared there, so I'm hoping you will be able to stay for a little longer, perhaps have a little informal chat with our guests. And I would just like to say one thing very shortly. I promise, because there are so many things Chief Alphonse was talking about, and I thought, okay, I will remember that for the rest of my life. But of course, you don't have time now to recall all that. But when Chastity was thanking us and say that thank you for you find our story important enough to give us the space to talk about, and I think it's for me it's very important to say that this is the most important story. We need to be able to provide a platform as much as we can and hear about it. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming today, and thank you very much for being with us today. And it's drinks time. It's not even Friday.